welcome to this week's edition of the American Scottish Foundation Scots in Us. I am Camilla Hellman, President of the American Scottish Foundation, and I'm delighted that this week you'll be joining us for one of our favourite Scots in Us episodes, the Distilleries. And so in honour of World Whisky Day, we're going to share with you updates from 3 distilleries that we work with. The Lindores Abbey Distillery, the Adelphi Distillery, producers of the Ardnamurchan whisky, and I'm sorry if I butchered that, and Mucklebridge, Port of Leith Distillery. Let us begin with the exciting news from the Lindores Abbey Distillery that on National Whisky Day, they launched the 2nd edition of the Maker's Malt, the commemorative charity bottling of Scotch whisky in collaboration with the Scots Maker, the National Poet of Scotland, and the Scotch Whisky Association, and a chosen distillery. A limited edition single malt Scotch whisky was produced by Lindores in conjunction with Kathleen Jamie, the national poet. Lindores was chosen by Jamie for the strong ties to the local community. Each bottle includes a poem written by Jamie to commemorate the bottling. For every bottle, 10% is donated to the Maker's Legacy, which supports artists and local charities. As Jamie states, like poetry, whisky speaks with a local dialect, formed from its land and rain, its grain and the rivers. Lindores Abbey and the distillery are a part of the community. We understand each other. And so now, let us listen to Kathleen Jamie and hear more of her Maker's Mark poetry.
Maker is an old word. It just means maker. And the medieval Scots poets were called the makers, and the word was utilised with the idea of having a national poet of Scotland and to be called the maker. So there have been 4 modern makers, I'm the 4th. And it is to be the person, the go-to person for things to do with poetry in Scotland. Poetry in Scotland goes back a long, long way. We can trace a good 1,000 years worth of written poetry, and it's always been an integral part of our lives and culture. Poetry and song for many hundreds of years, even before Robert Burns was born. But since then, Scottish culture has been heavily identified with poetry, and we use it at all levels of society, community level, and for the higher reaches of art.
Oh, I think the connection between poetry and Scotch whisky goes back forever. I mean, I've got 3 books about Lindores, all written all of them over 100 years old, and they're full of poetry. I mean, they're full of poetry, they're full of stories, they're full of history, and a lot of it is very local to here. So I think it goes back centuries, and I think there's huge links. I'm
fortunate enough to live near the distillery here at Lindores, and so the fields and the trees and the river are all very, very familiar to me and have been for many years. So it was not difficult to think my way into the poem because all the aspects that go into the making of the whisky are already familiar to me.
Having read quite a lot of Kathleen's work, and as I say, knowing she's local, so knowing she walks past the distillery with her dog and walks the same land that we walk, it meant a great deal to think that we've got the macaw in our midst, and the fact she'd be writing about whisky and about our area just meant a great deal to us.
I was invited down here to the distillery and presented with an array of whiskies and told how to taste them. This is completely new to me, and what to look out for in this process of fully tasting something, So I sat with 6 or 7 different whiskies, and the blender saying, listen to this, look to that, smell this, taste that, and it was an absolute revelation.
It's an honor for Lindores Abbey Distillery to be chosen to release the Maker Malt 2. And I've been delighted to work with Kathleen Jamie, the Scottish Maker, to produce the creation of the Maker Malt 2. What I did was making different prototypes, so offering her different alternatives. So she had a multitude of options to choose her perfect rum.
So when I came to write the poem, I'm interested in language and in dialects and in accents, you know, what writer isn't? And I realised that there's a relationship there. All the different whiskies in the different distilleries, it's like they've got their own accent or their own dialect of the land and the area they come from, as do the people. And so I thought that's something I want to get into the poem, that sense that this whisky speaks with this local accent and it comes from the land and the rain and the flowers and the trees localised to it. So I could see an analogy there between whisky and poetry, you know, in that they're both localised and should be listening to their own local dialects and their own local wordage.
As Jamie states, like poetry, whisky speaks with a local dialect formed from its land and rain, its grain and the rivers. Lindores Abbey and the distillery are a part of the community. We understand each other. And so now, let us listen to Kathleen Jamie and hear more of her Maker's Mark poetry. And now let us join Alex Bruce, Managing Director of the Adelphi Distillery, producers of the Ardnamurchan whiskies, which are now available throughout the United States. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of The Scots in Us. And we turn our attention once more to Scotland and its great distilleries. Over Tartan Week, we were joined in New York by a distillery of the Adelphi Distillery, and we all had a chance, except me, because I'm very ashamed to say I didn't manage to taste the wonderful Ardnamurchan whiskey, which I butchered terribly at this moment. But we're now going to be joined by the managing director of the Adelphi Distillery, Alex Bruce, and he's going to bring us up to date and introduce us to this wonderful distillery, which began in the 1830s and has had a rebirth as Mark II in a different place with a slightly different remit. So, Alex, I'm so sorry that I keep butchering your great whiskey, which I only heard wonderful things about. So that's why I've been very keen to try to connect with you and make sure that we all know more about it.
Well, thank you, Camilla, and thank you for having me on. It's an absolute delight to join you. But you're right. I mean, Adelphi is far easier to pronounce than Ardnamurchan. Back in about 2011, we were applying for planning permission to build our new distillery in Ardnamurchan, which is a very remote part of the West Highlands of Scotland. And we had a board meeting to decide what to call the distillery, because we were running into a few local obstacles, and we felt that it would be a good time to go out with a press release and extol the virtues of what a new distillery could really bring to a remote part of Scotland. And so you, of course, to do a press release, you need a name for that distillery. So we banded about many different names of local places and hamlets and lochs and hills and all that. And I said, well, what's wrong with the name of the place, which is Ardnamurchan? And there was a pause, and everyone said, oh, that's quite good, actually. Why don't we call it Ardnamurchan? So that's what we did call it. We have to have a phonetic spelling on our packaging just to help people who haven't come across it before.
But you're now available in the United States and in a really good wide distribution. And that must be quite exciting. How long has that been going on?
Well, I mean, in fairness, we built this distillery for a number of reasons, but the main one, the principal reason, was to allow Adelphi, which has been going for 30 years as an independent bottler, to really grow, because the distribution that Adelphi had was global, but very niche, in that we could only supply a pallet of whiskey here and a pallet of whiskey there. So what Ardnamurchan has done is it's piggybacked on that distribution that Adelphi already had, and Adelphi's name and of quality, but we've increased the volume because we've been able to make it ourselves. So yes, we've been in America now for, really since about the turn of the century. But with Ardnamurchan, we've only hit the ground running since 2020. But yes, no, look, it's been great. I mean, we are currently imported in via California, and then the way it works in the US is it's a 3-tier system. So you have an importer, they sell to distributors in the different states, and there are states which are relatively easy to distribute in and others that aren't. And then the distributors then sell to the retailers, who then sell to the consumers. So it's quite a long, drawn-out route to market, but we do have good coverage now in the US.
So Ardnamurchan, I'm getting better.
Yeah.
You have single malts and you have blends, and you're very much an environmentally aware, believing in recycling and all these different things, distillery. Could you speak a little bit to that? Because you've got hydropower and wood chips being used for the forests, and talk us through that a little bit.
Well, one of the other things, apart from having to think about the name back in 2011, was also to really understand the area that we were going to put this distillery in. The main reason we put it there is because 2 of our shareholding families had land availability, but also it gave us an opportunity to think in a sort of circular economy kind of way, in a very pragmatic way with one of these families. So that family, the land that they own is very, very rocky. It's very proper West Highland Scottish land. You can't grow crops, so you're limited to sheep, cattle, that kind of thing. And of course, forestry. Now, forests, we believe, we look at them and we go, oh, that looks lovely. I wonder who put that there, kind of thing. And it's great, and everyone likes forests. But actually, if you look at them as a crop, it's a different story. So softwood, which grows all over the world and grows particularly well on the west coast of Scotland, can be regarded as a 25 to 30-year-old rotational crop. So you grow them, and in 30 years, you cut them down and you've got timber. Now, most people would use them for building things, furniture, houses. But where we are, it's too expensive to take them out for manufacture. So you need a local source, a local demand, which can take reasonable volume. So by putting a distillery right in the heart of the peninsula, that entity, that family could then build a plant to supply us with harvested trees in the form of wood chip. And we burn about 1 ton every 2 hours, and it's being delivered from literally 2 miles down the road in a tractor and trailer. So it's incredibly local, but it's important.
And your carbon footprint is wonderful.
It's very low, yeah. I mean, burning wood does produce carbon, but the whole local use and the fact that it's a natural material that can be regenerated or regrown is far outweighs the smoke that comes out the chimney. So that's the wood side, and then of course plenty of water. So all of our cooling water comes off the river, which runs past the distillery, and there's good drop in height from the top to the bottom of that river. So we can also power some of the distillery using hydro off that, and we have about 350 solar panels on one of the warehouses, which helps as well. Even in Scotland, the sun shines.
But that's wonderful. And so how many different blends do you have and single malts do you have?
So as I said at the beginning, the distillery is primarily focusing on producing its own whiskey. So that is single malt.
Single malt. Yeah.
The term single malt literally means that it's come from one distillery. So in our case, it's Ardnamurchan single malt Scotch whiskey because it's come from Ardnamurchan. However, last year we made a decision to expand the range by using our own whiskey as a major ingredient in a blended Scotch whiskey. So a blended Scotch whiskey is one that is a mixture of different distilleries, malt whiskies, and also different distilleries, grain whiskies. We wanted to create a blend, but we wanted it to be our blend. So we kind of turned the whole blended recipe on its head. Normally, when you pick up a bottle of blended Scotch whisky in a shop, it contains about 30% maximum malt whisky and about 70% grain whisky, because grain's a lot cheaper. We flipped that on its head, and this is a 70% malt blend with 30% grain. And of the 70% malt, 60% are from Ardnamurchan Distillery. So it's our blend. It's named after a local landmark called McLean's Nose, which is a big
Yes, I
rock.
saw that.
Yeah, but it's also, ironically, it's also the name of chief blender for the last 30 years. Is a lovely man called Charlie McLean, who's a famous author and nose. So it is named McLean's Nose, both after Charlie and his nose, and after the rock in Ardnamurchan.
So we're now available here, wide distribution, so people can find it. We're going to put all those details up. We're also going to give them your website so that they can go there to ask any questions in relation to that. What are you looking to do next? What's your next vision in this journey?
Wow. So we're obviously getting older. This is our 10th anniversary coming up this year.
Right.
So on the 1st of August, we will have had a single cask filled for 10 years. Many people kind of ask, when are you going to release your first age statement? So 10-year-old whiskey, for example.
Yes.
And my kind of stock reply to that is, don't get hung up on ages. And I'm not just trying to back out of that whole, older whiskey is better argument. What I'm trying to say is that, first of all, what you recognize as an age statement whiskey, so a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, 18-year-old, whatever, all of these things were brought in the late 1990s to support the growth of single malt. Because up until that point, most of us drank blended Scotch whisky. And to bring single malt in, you needed to kind of elevate it. So the marketing departments of the big companies back in the 90s thought that age statements would be a good way of elevating it in comparison to blend. Now, most modern Scotch whiskies, so whiskies produced in distilleries in recent years, are designed to age more quickly than they were in the last century. In the last century, they were being produced for blends. So they were going into casks which weren't particularly active, and then they were getting blended together as a final product. Nowadays, we are spending a lot more time and money on our casks, our
Yes.
barrels.
And thinking about what the cask gives to the whiskey.
Exactly, that marriage. Because
Yes.
at the end of the day, we want a product which is our own. It belongs to our distillery singularly. So you actually get equivalent, a 5-year-old whiskey today, if it's made well, is equivalent quite possibly to an 18-plus-year-old in previous years, when everything was being made for blended. So
When I was looking through some of the documents around the very first Scotland weeks which were done by the American Scottish Foundation, and Lady Natalie writing about the whiskey industry in the early 80s being under such pressure.
Yes.
And so what you say is really interesting, having read all her concerns for what was going on and what could they do to help.
I mean, we all heard about the boom and bust periods of Scotch whisky over the centuries. The biggest one was probably at the turn of the 19th century. 19th into 20th. And there was a huge scandal around overvaluation of bulk stocks in the industry. And the whole industry collapsed because the banks started calling in all of their loans and everything else. So many, many distilleries closed because their owners couldn't afford to keep them going. More recently, the one you mentioned So that was kind of when I was joining the industry in the mid-90s. We were just coming out of that last downturn, that last dip. But the huge difference between those days and what we have now, and I've kind of alluded to this already, is that everyone was making whiskey back then to sell to someone to make a blend. So if you were making that whiskey, you actually weren't controlling what happened at the other end with the consumer. And if the blenders or the marketing departments of some other company miles away from you wasn't doing a particularly good job, that of course adversely affected on your production. But because whiskey takes a long time to mature, it didn't adversely affect you on the same day, like it would with gin or something that's made same day. It adversely affected you 10 years later when you were meant to have a mature product, and then suddenly no one wanted to buy it anymore. So nowadays we are making our own whiskey, we are making our own future as single malt. So we have a much better control over how we market it, how we sell it, how we adapt to growing trends around the world.
And so I do have to ask you, I think you're very remote. So it's not that people can get in their car when they get up into the Highlands and think that they can reach you easily. Am I right?
Look, Ardnamurchan it's a bit of a pilgrimage. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth. I mean, you're surrounded by water, white sandy beaches. Even, you know, it looks like the tropics. It is stunning, absolutely stunning, and sparsely populated as well. So it's proper wilderness. But we joke that it is basically 4 hours drive in a car from just about anywhere in Scotland, including Ardnamurchan. But it's a beautiful drive. You drive through the mountains and you head out west.
And you are also, rather like with the Harris Distillery, you're really helping the local community too. And that's so important with all of these projects, with so many of these projects, that they are helping these island communities.
Up in Ardnamurchan, everyone who works there now is local.
Wow.
So when we started, we had to bring in a couple of people to help with experience, and they have passed that experience on to everyone who lives there. The current distillery manager, who's been there since we started, used to be the bus driver. We've got people who have come back with their families because there is now an occupation to come to. And for the future, we need to guarantee both a workforce for ourselves, but also a reason to stay for the young people growing up in Ardnamurchan. So what we've done is we've started back in 2014 when we started selling at cost private casks, so individual casks of our spirit, to the local charity. They hang on to them until each kid turns 18, each local person who turns 18. That new adult then gets the opportunity to sell them back to us at a profit at today's rate, and take that cash and go to university or start a business or whatever else they want to do, as long as it has reasonable commercial sense or makes reasonable commercial sense. In the meantime, we try to persuade them that the Scotch whisky industry is a fantastic place to work, and they have a beautiful distillery on their doorstep, so why bother leaving the peninsula? So it's a kind of win-win, really, and it's all about, you know, ensuring a brighter future for some of these remote locations.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you. So I'm so glad that we've connected and that we've begun to share Ardnamurchan's wonderful journey with everyone. I'm really looking forward to hearing about the next releases and the 10-year-old. That's this August?
So no, the first 10-year-old, which will actually be a celebratory 10th anniversary release, it will be 10 years old. That will be towards the end of the year, because obviously we have to wait for enough casks to turn 10. In the US, we obviously have our main core products. We have the blend, the Maclean's Nose, we have the single malt. We also occasionally do a limited edition, and we're just about to launch a second of those, which is called, and excuse the pun, but it's called Ardnamurchan. So the first
And
one,
why is that?
the first one was released for a special event and like a tour. I think it was 2 years ago or 18 months ago, and it was called the Ardnamurchan Tour. So it was so popular, and it was East Coast only, that the West Coast was crying out and everyone else was crying out for another one. So we have just bottled Ardnamurchan Batch 2, and that will be winging its way over the ocean at some point.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and onwards we go, and to speaking again very soon.
Oh, no, absolutely delighted. Thank you so much for having me, Camilla.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
I was recently able to catch up with Ian Sterling, co-managing director of the Mucklebridge Distillery, and to hear about all that they have going on with the Port of Leith Distillery experiences and Linden Line Gin, and also a new table whiskey that they're launching. And so without more ado, let us catch up with Ian Sterling and hear of all that they are doing, not only around production of whiskey and gin, but in bringing the experience to all of us. And now I'm delighted that I'm able to be joined by Ian Sterling, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of the Mucklebridge Distillery, which is also the Port of Leith Distillery. And so we're going to catch up with Ian now and find out all they've been up to, because there's a lot going on. Ian, let us have an update from you about what you have been doing with this wonderful distillery that is quite young, and introducing many things all the time.
Yes, yeah, indeed, yes. We've had a very busy 12 months, it's fair to say. You find us, I suppose, 10 years into our odyssey of running this company, and really at the end of the beginning, because we finally completed construction of the Port of Leith Distillery. We opened to the public in October of last year. And finally, in January of this year, of 2024, we were able to start production of our single malt whiskey. So that's been a very long road for us. It started with me and my friend Paddy back in a garden playing with a little still back in 2013. And finally, after many, many years of fundraising and construction, design challenges, et cetera, we're finally there and can start producing whiskey. So that's been a very exciting indeed. And the building we've built, if your listeners aren't aware, is exceedingly unique, and certainly in terms of Scotland, but also the world. It's actually the tallest distillery in the world, as far as we can tell. A 40-meter tall vertical distillery in Leith, the harbour district of Edinburgh, right next to the Royal Yacht Britannia. And of course, a big part of our plan, because we're a startup distillery with no big company behind us, we need some revenues in the early years while we're laying down our whiskey. So our location next to Britannia, etc., means we're very focused on getting as many visitors as we can in the early years.
And you do want us to come see you?
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. Every visitor, that ticket is paying for us to produce whiskey, so they're very, very welcome indeed, and we love doing it.
Just for 1 second, what is the visit to the Port of Leith Distillery all about? What does the visitor get? Can they do a tasting? Do they see what you're doing to produce the early stages of your whiskies and everything else?
Well, exactly so. I mean, so we've been running those tours since October. You arrive, it's very much, to begin with, about the business entrepreneurial story of getting this distillery established. And then working your way through the vertical layout of our distillery. So it's if anything, even just quite an exceptional architectural experience wandering through this process, down to the stills on the ground floor. And then, yes, we take you back up to the 5th floor, where we have our tasting lab, and we put you through quite an extensive tasting. And if you've managed to get through the extensive tasting, there's a further tasting in the shop. on the 6th floor. And if you get through that, well, we have a bar on the 8th floor, 8th and 9th floor of the building. I say bar, it actually does a restaurant offering as well. And that's just an exceptional space that even if you don't come from a tour, you must come and visit the bar, because it's you have these extraordinary views out across the sea, the Firth of Forth, you know,
It's
of
beautiful.
Edinburgh. It's just views you don't get anywhere else in Edinburgh, and it's an exceptional place. Even on a horrible day, watching the storms wave in off the sea or whatever it might be, it's a wonderful space. So yes, we're having a lot of fun running all of that and seeing it come to fruition at last. So it's
And, so you have the Port of Leith Distillery underway, whiskey being laid down, all of that, which we'll come back to in a second, and to keep you've got this wonderful experience for people, helping to generate income as you grow, and then of course are doing a great gin.
yes,
Linden Lime.
Yes, so Linden Lime is now in November. We celebrated the 5th anniversary of Linden Lime. Paddy and I launched that in 2018. And you know, we'd originally started this business to start a whiskey distillery, and eventually we realized that was taking so long, we ought to get something going, and we established Linden Lime. And we had the smallest hopes for it. You know, we thought there's so many gins in the world, they don't need another. But it just blew us away. And so we're now exporting that to 27 countries around the world. And we launched last year in the USA. As I speak,
you were very kind to support Bernstein and Wallace last year, and people loved it. They had heard about it and they were delighted. So our auction was helped by it. Thank you.
what was that was in New York, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are, it must be said, we're trying to fix our distribution in New York to a slightly more optimal scenario, because it's not as available as it could be. But in the meantime, I think, you know, Southern California, Illinois, we're across Binney stores in Illinois and Chicago, which is fantastic, and Indiana, Georgia, South Carolina, Charleston. It's been quite a hit in Charleston, which was one of my favorite cities to go and visit, I must say, in the USA. So yes, we're building up that distribution, building up the awareness, and you know, it's just a big old place, the USA. So it takes a while to really sort of permeate all those different venues, but we're working on it. So that's been very exciting indeed. And of course, Linden Lime is now, you know, certified organic, and it's all produced at our little gin distillery in Leith. It's just about a 10-minute walk from the whiskey distillery to the gin distillery. And there again, if you're ever in Edinburgh, we do wonderful tours at the Linden Lime Distillery, which are great fun. That at the Linden Lime Distillery, almost the moment you arrive, you have a gin and tonic thrust into your hand. You know, but before we take you through the gin making process, but then you have to fill a little 5mm miniature of our gin while we're there. And our tour guides are wonderfully rude about people's labeling ability. And then we put you through a cocktail making masterclass. So again, it's a very, you know, it's a very busy and extremely fun tour if you're ever in Leith.
Well, you need to write that up for us so that we can do some promotion about it, because we have many of our members and friends and listeners who are, of course, coming across to Edinburgh. And this is a different experience. Going down to Leith in itself is great.
Yes, yeah.
Now be able to learn more of the Leith Porter's Distillery and Linden Lime is fantastic. But you also have the Leith Export Company, and you have this thing you were telling me called a whiskey table.
Table whiskey, almost.
Sorry, which is going to be like a wine that you could be having, something rather to pour during the meal. It's lighter.
Just in November last year, we launched Table Whiskey, and this really came about because we happened upon a wonderful source of grain whiskey produced at the North British Distillery in Edinburgh that had been matured in virgin oak, in new oak barrels. And that's quite an unusual combination. And together we were saying, this stuff is utterly delicious. And we have quite a good sort of long-term source for it. And then Paddy and I, my business partner and lifelong friend, we've always had this idea of doing table whiskey, because you have table wine. And we thought we've got to find this just great sipping whiskey, unassuming, wonderful quality, but just so easy to enjoy. And that's your table whiskey. And it has a, you know, the brand name that sort of understates the quality of what you're about to enjoy. And I always remember, you know, that Paddy and I used to go to a restaurant in London together. We go, God, the pizza here is awful, but the table wine's fantastic. And you know, and it always stayed with us. So hence table whiskey is now a thing. And it's become, again, taken us a bit by surprise just how popular it's tended to be. There's something about the name, and if you see the brand, it's very much in a wine bottle. It looks, it has a lot of echoes of a wine brand in many ways, and it just
can we get
struck a
that here
chord.
yet? Can we
We
get one
are
over here?
not yet, but I hope before the end of the year we should have it in the USA. Our US importer is very interested in carrying it over there, and we think it should do well. So yes, perhaps in time for Christmas, I hope.
Watch this space.
Exactly, and
Oh.
hold your breath.
Well, this is fantastic. So there is so much going on with you, and I think we need to try to catch up with you in a couple of months' time again. But I really do encourage people to come down to experience the port of Leith Distillery in Mucklebridge and to see all the different things, and then wander up the road a little bit, round the corner in Leith, and go to Linden Lime.
Yes, exactly. And it must be said, I mean, just most visitors to Edinburgh might not think of coming down to the harbour area of Leith, but it is a place that has totally regenerated in recent years. And there's wonderful restaurants, Michelin star restaurants. There's beautiful ships to see. It's a wonderful area and so much history. So it's well worth. And now, of course, there's a tram from the centre of Edinburgh down to Leith, making it so incredibly easy to pop down in about 20 minutes. So yes, make sure you come to Leith while you're in Edinburgh.
Because also you've got the historical old part of the harbour down there.
Yes,
not
shore,
just
we call it,
the new construction. There's wonderful, lovely roads around the back.
Yes, So you have the sort of the historical heart of it, which is called the shore. And I mean, I've become obsessive about Leith history because essentially all of Scottish history passed through Leith. Leith was Scotland's gateway to the world until really the latter part of the 20th century. And so it's steeped in history, but also from a whisky perspective, it was to all intents and purposes the epicenter of the Scotch whisky industry throughout the 20th century. It had the only warrant for the bonding of wines and spirits. So whiskey, whether it's Glenmorangie or Diageo, that's where they bonded their spirits, they matured them, they blended them, they bottled them. It was all happening in Leith before being exported to the world. So it is that, I guess it's the Brooklyn of New York, if you like it. It's that post-industrial area that's now become wonderfully sort of a place for creative people and artistic people and wonderful cooks and creators to make exciting things. So yes, well worth a visit. In fact, you haven't really visited Edinburgh unless you've been
unless you go down there.
Yes,
exactly. I agree with you. And it won't be as crazy if you're there in August. It won't be as crazy as the centre. So in fact,
indeed,
going there during the day before maybe you go off and do lots of theatre is a great idea.
Exactly, a bit of respite from the crowds. I couldn't agree more. Yes, yeah.
So Ian, thank you for taking time to talk to us this morning. We're going to catch up with you soon, and I encourage all to look for Linden Lime. It's delicious gin. We've been fortunate enough at the ASF to sample it, and we will speak with you soon.
Wonderful. Lovely to see you again, Camilla. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode around the distilleries of Scotland. This is our 4th episode around the distilleries, and we so enjoy joining all these young, wonderful distilleries and some of the older ones who've got new innovative things happening. And so join us every 2 weeks for the Scots in Us. The 1st and 3rd Monday of the month, there's a new release on all the different platforms. To learn more of what the American Scottish Foundation is doing, please visit our website, americanscottishfoundation.org, to learn more. And so until next time.